Welcome to the EI Guru podcast, a podcast completely focused on emotional intelligence. Typically, the first question I get is, what is emotional intelligence? In very simple terms, it's how we manage our emotions in our interactions with ourselves and others. Or put another way, it's being in the right state and not being in a state when under pressure. Emotional intelligence is another label for mindset, and we all know that when navigating those important conversations, we need to tap into our best. I'll be interviewing leaders and experts in this ever-expanding field and sharing the data on why emotional intelligence is the difference that makes the difference in all of our relationships. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. So good morning and welcome to the EI Guru podcast in January, just in January 2024, and a belated Happy New Year to our listeners, and belated Happy New Year to you as well, Jo. So I've been away, as you know, hence the slight tan that I've been able to pick up while I was over in Phoenix for 6 weeks. So I've done a fairly nice stint over in Phoenix, which was beautiful, and avoiding some of the weather here in the UK, although I've come back to chilly weathers and high winds. So yeah, Jo, we've had a little bit of a break, probably about 8 weeks at least, I'd say, from our last session. And I thought it'd be great to sort of pass to you and help our listeners get a bit of a sort of a preview of what we've covered so far. It's interesting. New Year's are really interesting in our world, as you know, as coaches, in your role as a coach as well, where a lot of people get to the back end of last year and they start thinking about the new year and what they'd like to achieve, the goals that they want to set themselves, etc. And it's around about now, sort of mid-Feb, where people start dropping off those commitments to those New Year's resolutions, which I find fascinating. Especially, it's interesting, isn't it? Especially in the fitness world. So, for example, people have a goal of getting fit, dropping some weight, maybe giving up cigarettes, etc. And it's about now that they start thinking, you know what, I can't really be bothered too much with this. I've lost a little bit of weight, or I've got a little bit fitter than I was before, and I just can't stay committed to this goal that I've set myself. So
that's interesting. Yeah,
it is. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that at some point. But Jo, I'm going to hand it over to you because I'm just gibbering on a little bit now.
So. It just stimulates all sorts of thoughts in my head, as always, Jim. And Happy New Year. Well, Happy 2024. End of January. And you made me think of the title of the book I wrote originally on emotional intelligence was How to Make Change Stick,
Yes.
Which is the whole point of development, I suppose. It's not too difficult to change, but making it sustainable over time is the more tricky bit.
It is.
And the angle that is very much taken with our approach to emotional intelligence is, you give people behaviors and skills and they can shift what they do, but that's only going to work if it's congruent, if it fits with your self concept, your attitude, your mindset, if you like. It can take longer, but we will inevitably revert back to. But if they're not congruent and your underlying self is not, it doesn't fit with what you do, then sooner or later one of them's got to give, and normally it's our behavior. Hence, in February, we sort of give up on the old effort that is required and willpower to change your behavior. But there's far less willpower and effort required if you actually believe this is what you're going to do. If you believe I'm not actually a smoker, even if I put a cigarette in my mouth, I don't believe that's who I am. Same with exercise. And one of the ways forward with that is very much habit change, something we have addressed in one or two of the previous podcasts. But the key there essentially is focus on something that's small, specific, measurable, and repeat it enough times to forge new neural pathways. Yeah. So like taking that new route, if you keep treading that path, and I've been doing a lot of walking recently over Christmas, and you can see where the sheep have gone or where the animals have trod, every night. Little tiny pitter patter, but over time it builds up to a bit of a trough, these sheep tracks. And that's the same with what's happening in our brain. You just got to repeat, and it will become embedded, and that will be the automated, which is what this is about.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues with emotional intelligence is it's very conscious and deliberate. Oh, how am I feeling? Where's it coming from in my body? That's a good starting point. But what really matters is you didn't have to spend a lot of energy thinking everything through, every emotion, every thought, but just doing it without, and then you can pay attention to new skills that you want to develop. So in terms of New Year's resolutions, I'm not a great fan, if I'm honest. I think they're great intentions, great wishes, but if you really wanted to do it, you wouldn't be waiting till the 1st of January.
No, very true.
I don't want to undermine it. It's a good trigger, to start things off.
No, you're bang on, because actually one of my mentors, Colin Hiles, who used to be at Speakers International, he's now pretty much a habit coach, and a phenomenal coach as well. And Colin is very much around just change one habit. Don't go for a whole cascade of them. Just change one thing, and focus on that one thing specifically, and pay attention to that. And yes, I think it's the New Year's resolution comes about because people look back on their year and think, I could have done better at that, and I want to be doing this more. And they reflect. Not many people have time for reflection, which of course is a scale that we measure in emotional intelligence, and we'll talk about that at some point. But reflective learning is a key element of how we then continue to grow and develop. And unfortunately the corporate world, and this as well as I do, Joe, that the corporate world is really poor at doing reflective learning. Organizations aren't great because they're running at such a pace. They're not that great at doing the reflective learning. So that, next month's results come in. If they're great, they think, fantastic, we're on a roll. So they just carry on. They don't look back and say, okay, so what was that about? What did we do to create that great result this month? Or what didn't we do that has allowed us to miss our target, for example? Because they're running so fast on the treadmill that they don't spend time reflecting. And I think we of course, individually, and teams also end up in the same trap, but individually we also are in that space. If I think about a family, a young, a couple with young kids, they're running so fast just to juggle all and keep those plates spinning. The kids at school, shopping, keeping the house tidy, 2 jobs typically. This is the modern world now.
Yeah, it is. And you end up on a busy autopilot, and you stop at the end of Christmas and think, what have I done this year? Just about coped and survived.
Yeah.
And that's entirely understandable. As a species, we try and grow and develop and improve, but just staying still, not going backwards is a challenge in itself. And maybe that's the reflective point. And if there's going to be one habit change I would suggest people start with, it would be slowing down and taking a little bit of a moment, even if it's 5 minutes every day, just to allow thoughts to come into your head, allow reflection, notice yourself in the moment a little bit more.
Yeah, no, you're bang on. I mean, that is one of my biggest, that's like, if I had a big banner, it would be to keep a journal. But it's one of in fact, every person I've ever coached, they get the same message, Joe. And it's almost like I put this on tape recorder and play this. You need to slow down. And it's amazing just how, every leader I've ever come across, they need to slow down. And, I think it's because we've been so heavily conditioned over the last 20 years that the corporate world demands an immediate response. So if you ask me a question, I've got to respond immediately with something that's precise, concise, bang on. And, that's what you expect. The old days, it used to be, well, just give me a moment. I might sleep on that.
Yes.
I might just let me come back with a considered thought.
Yes. And there was more time. We're talking letter writing days and WhatsApp days, and you could
Yeah.
just take stock before reacting.
Yeah.
And actually, consideration and reflection helps us to put things in perspective a lot better. It's generally less emotional as well.
Mm.
We've worked through it, and sleeping on it is a big point to that. It's we deactivate unresolved emotions when we sleep. It helps us process things in metaphorical ways, which is what dreaming is. Um, and often that helps us when we do wake up and the emotion has been removed largely from the situation, and we think more clearly, because as we know from the brain, too much emotion can make us stupid. Too much
Yep.
emotion blocks access to our thinking brain,
Yeah.
makes us more judgmental. So yeah, I'd agree with that, Jim. I mean, when I was working for the Human Givens Institute, and I did a fair bit of their training on coaching and so forth, and they would always start the process with calming down, and it was a breathing activity, and that was just to help the individual to think a little bit more clearly, to help them to lower the emotional level. And because coaching is to a large extent about problem solving, and our
Yeah.
brains are much better at problem solving when they can see the bigger picture.
Mm.
Emotions tend to narrow our focus, they make us more judgmental, and they stop us thinking more clearly. So a starting point is very much slowing down those emotions, giving us access to some of um, the deeper thoughts, if you like, intuitions, the
Yeah.
bits of us that are working all the time, the unconscious process going on all the time that we don't always access because we're so noisy in our head. Reducing the noise just gives us more access to those intuitions, insights, and if you like, creativity, which is what businesses are really seeking.
Yeah.
They want us to be able to be insightful, innovative, and that's how we're going to work out, create solutions for the future, and be, all the things that they want, productive and profitable. But it seems more immediate and rewarding instantly to react, and activate.
Yeah.
But you pay the big bucks for people who slow down, not the people who speed up, actually.
Yeah. 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 It's the old, it reminds me of the old classic saying, which is don't just sit there, do something. But actually, leaders, great leaders, are the people that do just sit there
Yeah,
and think things through
yeah,
instead of getting really busy and just doing things.
yeah.
You
So
know, so
don't just do something, sit there.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
reversing it
yeah,
round. Yeah, yeah,
completely. So it's a classic. What are you doing just sitting there? Get up off your backside and get some stuff done. It's sort of
yeah,
like, no, you're a leader. You need to just sit there and
yeah,
cogitate on, your strategic thinking
yeah,
aspects of your role.
yeah.
Anyway,
One,
I know I've
yeah.
I've sideswiped you a little bit with your review, Joe. So I do. It's typical of me to sort of get us into
Yeah.
other aspects. But
Well, it's very
sorry.
current, isn't it, for the people, for all of us, 2024, what are, I mean, goal direction is knowing what you want and where you want to go is a great point. And often in the workplace, we'll be doing annual reviews at the end of the year and then planning for the next year. And if everyone's doing it at the same time, that's also good because it creates a lot of energy, enthusiasm, and you want to build on that. If it's an opportunity, use it as a way forward. I think my concern is it's actually not that difficult to get people energized at the beginning of events. It's much more difficult to maintain that.
Yeah.
And retaining engagement and motivation over time is where I'm at with emotional intelligence. What is it that's going to enable a person to do that? And
Mm,
taking stock, slowing down, reviewing, checking in with yourself, is a way of doing that.
yeah.
Because there will be ups and downs, and chances are when things go wrong, that's when we fall off the wagon. And in February is when we often fall off the wagon, whether it's literally boozing and cruising and not going to gym or whatever. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's expected and it's the right thing to do. In fact,
Yeah.
just saying, okay, well, we aren't perfect human beings, but let's just chip away at it and do one more thing. And maybe change your routine, change the process, mix things up a little bit at every few weeks will be a good way of maintaining it. But that's another podcast about maintaining change.
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk a bit about some of the emotional aspects of, which is actually very related, because we did trust, I think was the last one we
Yes.
looked at, was and the next scales look at things like emotional expression and control,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is a lot to do with it actually. Emotional expression and control is about managing your emotional what's going on for you and how impulsive you might be, and the tendency to not have much control over your emotional reactions. So people who are better at managing their emotional energy in the moment are probably going to be more sustaining in achieving the outcomes they want,
Yeah.
not being distracted so easily. So we'll look at that. And obviously, emotional expression control relates to the other facet of EI we often talk about, which is dealing with conflict.
Yeah.
Somebody who can go off the handle and become quite aggressive, which we all can. Again, that's under controlled emotionally, and maybe bottling things up, being more passive. So those two aspects of emotional intelligence we could look at together to some extent. But before I did that, I was just going to have a quick review of some of the things we've talked about over 2023.
Yeah. Please do that, Joe. That'd be great.
And I think I'll just really mention this in terms of what are the fundamentals of our approach to emotional intelligence? What are the underpinning blocks? So the foundations are really a framework, an organizing structure, an organizing model to put the different parts together. Emotional intelligence isn't just bits that sound great, but they are drawn together by coherence of levels. If you think, we talked about layers of an onion, what you see might be the behavior, but what sustains that is the underlying attitude at the deeper level. And what joins those two parts, behavior and attitude, is awareness. So taking stock, which is what we've just discussed, is the glue, if you like, between performance and activity and your underlying self attitude. But if you're not aware, then it's very difficult to bring those two together or to change them. So all of these different facets we talk about are behavior, but the very core of that is our attitude. And underpinning the different aspects of emotional intelligence, all the different scales, 16 of them in the EIP, for example, are a series of mindsets that myself and Tim Sparrow put together. They're drawn from humanistic psychology. And we said, well, what is it that will enable a human being, a person, to be more emotionally intelligent? If we hold certain mindsets, beliefs, attitudes about ourselves and about the world more generally, then they're going to be far more compatible and enable us to develop these behaviors. So those are in the original literature in the book. Each of us is responsible for actions. People can change. Feelings and behavior are separate. There's 8 of these, and they go throughout different theoretical models of human change and development. But of course, the different scales that we developed were drawn from those fundamental attitudes. So, for example, where does awareness, where does flexibility come from? The capacity to move outside your comfort zones, from the fundamental principle that you believe that people can change.
Yeah.
As a coach, that's a big challenge for many people, because they'll often say, well, I am the way I am. A leopard doesn't change its spots. I'm not going to be able to do what you want me to do or to change my behavior.
I mean, it's the old classic saying of, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, which in a coaching context, that's a real nice challenge to create new thinking patterns, which then create new behaviors, which then create different results. So it's in line with what you're saying 100%. And it's slowly catchy monkey in that regard.
So the principles behind this, our model of emotional intelligence, is having attitudes that enable that, and changing the attitude can take longer, but it's more sustainable in the long run. And the primary attitude is, however you are and others are is okay.
Yes.
So fundamentally, it's not saying every behavior you do, but at least as a valuable, worthwhile individual human being, then we are, should have unconditional acceptance towards ourselves, even if we want to improve and change some of our behaviors. And that's where the two Rogerian concepts of self-regard and regard for others come together to form our attitude matrix, which informs much of our model of emotional intelligence.
The OK Corral, and I'll stick these frameworks in so that the listeners that actually quite like watching the video can get the video and see these frameworks that you've discussed already, Jo. And for me, that the world would be such a wonderful place if we could all be in that space, and unfortunately we're not. So the I'm okay, i.e. having a high self-regard and having a high regard for others, you're okay, that lens, that perspective, if everyone had that, the world would be a lot better place to live in. But of course, unfortunately, that's not the case. Not everyone is okay with themselves first and foremost, but also they're also very judgmental and not okay with others as well.
And of course, as we know, that with those the life positions, we move between them as well.
Yes.
So we might spend 90% of our time in that sort of top right hand okay zone, but sometimes different conditions, situations, people will trigger us out of that. And the trick about emotional intelligence is not to say you're always in the green zone, is to notice when you fall out of it.
Yeah.
Hence the glue in the glue between attitude and behaviors, being aware. And there are two main streams to this. One is self-awareness, and the other one is awareness of other people and relationships. So yes, we do move between those different places. Recognizing when we do it is in a non-judgmental, accepting way. So it's okay to fall out, but do you know it's happening? Do you know how that impacts your behavior and relationships? Do you know how to get back into the green zone? What techniques and tricks do you use? How long do you stay there? And the danger is, of course, we can spiral downwards and get stuck and struggle to move out, particularly if we are more critical of ourselves, negative towards ourselves.
So someone with a low self-regard can stay stuck almost permanently for the, we joked about it and laughed about it. The two characters that I think represent someone with a low self-regard is, well, in particular, the one that I think of is from Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore. So Eeyore is sort of like, thanks for noticing me, and almost expects things to always go wrong, and doesn't have a great view and sense of themselves at all, unfortunately. And energetically, that can over time be extremely draining, of course, and draining on others as well. So that has an impact on other people within the workplace, for example.
Which draws us back to emotions, really, Jim, doesn't it? And noticing this is not just well, there's three components here. We talk about attitude, feeling, and behavior. And yeah, I mean, you were mentioning, Jim, about your feelings, and that can be contagious and impact on other people, and actually affect yourself. The more negative you are, the more negative you feel. But the three components we talk about in the framework are attitude, feeling, and behavior. Behaviors are more short term, we can change them, but they need to be compatible with attitude. Attitude are less tangible, but the part in the middle, the jam in the sandwich, is the awareness of feelings. If I start noticing feelings, then that's the clue as to what's going on for me. Why do I feel upset and worried? Well, maybe because underneath I'm unsure about myself, or don't feel competent, or worried that people don't like me. So that's the attitude bit. So the feelings are the clue, and I can use those to start shifting my behavior, which is maybe I need to be a bit more approachable, or be a bit more open to discussing things with people, whatever the behaviors you want to change. But at the same time, I need to look at the feelings which are driving that and the attitude that's underpinning it.
And interestingly, of course, when we talk about self-regard, and I know we've gone into this previously, Jo, but for some people that might be listening to this for the first time at this stage in our podcast, so much of the self-regard and regard for others is shaped in our childhood, and so much of our stuff as adults we are trying to sort of deal with, because it's our inner child that is creating havoc and chaos in our adult life right now. So I find that absolutely fascinating, and everyone's got an inner child, and even if you've had a phenomenal upbringing, with two very loving parents, that doesn't necessarily give you a free pass to having a healthy self-regard.
No,
So
which is
it's absolutely fascinating.
yeah, which is why we fall out of this okay zone, because certain things will come back to haunt us and
Yep.
trigger us back into those zones. And it may always be the case to some extent, however hard you work on changing yourself. It's actually, I do get triggered by this. I do get critical of other people sometimes because, this thing happens, but I've learned to deal with it better, manage it, and sort of move on and change my behavior.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're right. So knowing your triggers is
mm,
really, really useful
mm,
to then being able to spot them
mm,
more quickly.
mm,
You know,
mm,
so you might not necessarily be really on it, know all your triggers, but when
mm,
you start noticing them, you
mm,
see them show up more often. And the quicker you
mm,
can
mm,
capture them, the quicker
mm,
you can grab
mm,
them, the
mm,
quicker you can do something about it. Instead of
mm,
letting it just go off on, you go on a little mini, what I call a hissy fit, you go on a
mm,
little
mm.
rant.
Yeah, but as you say, it's sort of noticing this stuff.
Mm,
There is also a danger of just getting stuck in the middle zone of just being a noticer, just
yeah.
being an emotional guru or awareness person. And you go
Mm-hmm.
on lots of training courses, and people love insight and they love hindsight. They love looking backwards.
Yep.
But we're interested also in what are you going to do about it? EI isn't just the nice reflective bit; it's the active, actionable stuff.
Yeah.
Hence this New Year resolution bit, which is actually how are you going to change? What needs to happen for you to create the future you want, or to behave differently as you want? And that takes a bit of thinking about,
Mm,
and also recognition that what is realistic. And I've got lots of wonderful visions of where I want to be, but it's a step by step, and maybe the first step's going to be the really tough one for me. Yeah, I think, but before taking those steps, the awareness piece and the reflection piece is vital.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
for
good we
sure.
can draw this to relevance to, a New Year's resolution or 2024 and what people are wanting to achieve. Goal directedness is very much about knowing where you want to go and what you want, and that can take quite a while working it out. Once you've got there, know how you're going to embark on that journey,
Yeah.
and be ready for setbacks. Learn how to deal with those setbacks, and all of the different facets on the profile help us to do that. It might be that one of those facets is most important for you.
Mm,
So maybe the reflective learning, I've not stopped and thought things through yet. Or maybe goal directed, I've not actually planned how I'm going to get there. Or maybe emotional resilience, I haven't worked out what I'm going to do when adversity strikes, and
yeah.
actually the inevitable um, dropouts that happen, like my blimmin' internet.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do when you fall off the wagon? Have I
Mm-hmm.
prepared for that? Or is it my old habits come in, which is I tend to give up when things go wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe your habit change is dealing with that part of it, is
Mm-hmm.
when things go wrong, I'm going to find a different way of recovering.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier, which is expect things to go wrong because it's never smooth.
Yeah.
It's very rare that it actually all goes completely 100% to plan.
Yeah.
Curveballs do get thrown in life, and that's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's real in the corporate world, and that does happen. Your competitors bring out a product earlier than you expected them
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
They lower their price. All
Yeah.
sorts of things happen.
Yeah. 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 So, shall we move on to specific actions, really, which are what the scales are about?
Yeah.
Those are some of the foundations to emotional intelligence that we've sort of recapped and their relevance. And I do think of all the scales of emotional intelligence are there to help us develop those fundamentals. But so emotional expression and control is clearly a very relevant scale when it comes to emotional intelligence. It's very core to coping with emotions, but it doesn't stand on its own. It's not like all of your emotional capacity and management is down to this one part. It's not, because a lot of it's down to self-awareness or awareness of others, or
Mm,
learning to connect with others or build trust with others. So all of the other parts still come to play in improving our emotional expression. So this particular scale is what it says on the tin. It's a balance between those two extremes, which is often the case with emotional intelligence. It's about balance, an optimal level, rather than being extreme. So there's a tendency sometimes for us to bottle things up, put the
Yeah. So
lid on the kettle. Sorry, go on, Jim.
no. Sorry. As you say this, a number of our listeners won't be fully aware of how this is measured. So the emotional expression and control, the thing I love unpacking this with individuals when I'm working with them. Under control is what you're talking about. So there are three different aspects to this particular scale. So as opposed to how you measure the self-management and self-regard and self-awareness, this is done in a bipolar fashion, which I know you've mentioned previously on another series episode on the relationship scale. So this relationship one around emotional expression and control, the first one that is measured is under controlled, which is what you were just about to dive into. Where you want to be, obviously, is free and in charge, which is the middle scale, the green scale. And then you've got the over controlled scale as well. So maybe if you can walk us through those, Joe, and how you can have either too much or too little of those, and just remind our listeners of the bipolar nature of the measurement.
Yeah. And of course, these subscales, these three parts, can be dynamic, which is another important feature of emotional intelligence. I think a lot of traditional measures of EI are trait based. You kind of, you like this and you're going to stay like that.
Yeah.
Well, I've never known anybody with emotions that's always the same. Emotions are up and down, they vary, they swing and they move, and they dynamic and impact us and impact others. So this is a great example of that. If I have strong emotions and I just keep them inside, because I know it's not acceptable to show anger, or I don't want people to realize I'm really upset about this. Or in my work environment, it's called emotional labor. Say you're a nurse and you have to be professional and not show too much annoyance with somebody, with a difficult patient. Then I have to, or customer manager, I have to be very professional in how I deal with somebody, yet inside I'm feeling pent up. I'm really annoyed or upset. What's going to happen to that emotion? Well, if you're very emotionally intelligent, you might be able to process it, and you'll have ways of talking to other people and thinking it through and calming down. But the chances are, for most people, it's going to come out later. It's going to come out inappropriately. So this is the example of somebody who's over controlling their emotions and not paying attention to them, perhaps, or not dealing with them sooner before they become too strong that they explode.
So someone that's bottling it up, which is, I think, a really good expression, bottling stuff up. So someone that's under controlled is going to be having a hissy fit, as I was saying earlier. So they throw a mini tantrum. So we've seen this in kids, and I always joke about this when I'm talking to a group of people, leaders, and say, how many people have seen children in a supermarket throw a hissy fit because they're not getting whatever they want in that moment. And then get them to realize and appreciate that actually, as adults, we probably still do throw some mini hissy fits. When we've got an email, or the results have just landed that we haven't hit the target, or someone's not done something that we want them to do, and we have a mini hissy fit, or we go home and we kick the dog or the cat, or or have a rant at the kids or our partner. They're mini hissy fits in a way. And so, under control is us just not being in control of our emotions and going, and it's not that's not great, actually. And if you live with someone that is, I know people, and I've worked with people that do have those outbursts, and they are outbursts. So it's almost like if someone scores very high on under controlled, it's the sort of situation where your team members might be saying to the secretary, is today a good day to have a conversation with Jim? Or what sort of mood's he in? Is today a good day? And you don't want that as a leader. You don't want to be exhibiting those sort of patterns of behavior. So
it's very unsettling for people around individuals like that. Particularly the rebounders, the people who are like, God, you can see there's something wrong, and but they're not saying it, and then sooner or later they'll, as you say, they'll have a hissy fit and explode or something. But it creates a great sense of anxiety in the environment. You create a climate around you. As a leader, it's one of the worst things because you're unpredictable. The emotional brain, as we know, looks for predictability. That's what keeps us safe. We know what's coming next.
Yeah.
Our emotional brain is there to anticipate, to predict, and even our emotions are there as a predictor. So fear is something dangerous is going to happen.
Yeah.
Anxiety is watch out. We need to be on our guard. Worry. Yeah. And so emotions tell us a little bit about what's probably going to happen. But we don't want to be constantly in anxiety mode because you don't know how your boss is going to behave or react or respond.
Exactly. So that's why this scale is so good. I really enjoy unpacking this scale when I'm working with individuals, especially the over control, the piece of bottling it up, the over controlled nature of someone bottles it up, they bottle it up, they bottle it up, and then eventually it's going to have to go somewhere. And typically it'll go to the person they care most about, your partner or your kids, or your secretary or someone that's close to you within your team. So they'll get the full force of that under control, pent up anger, frustration, anxiety, whatever that might be, and you have an emotional hissy fit.
Do you find that a lot of people you work with as a coach have carried on being like that for many years? It's not like, it's suddenly become a characteristic, but they've never really changed it. It's become an ingrained characteristic of theirs.
I think people, their team end up navigating around that. And that was my point, is today a good day to go and see Jim or have this conversation, or they're sensing whether you're in a good mood or not. And that's not it's not a great space for anyone to be in. So yeah, this is a really big insight for a leader to be conscious of. Okay, so how do I handle that stuff? And I know you and I have spoken about it. We use the model E plus R equals O, which I think is a really, I call it a life model. And I think and I know we've spoken about E plus R equals O before, on one of our other episodes, but the E, as you know, Jo, represents the experience or the event. So the event. So we don't have a great deal. Well, we have no control over the experience or the event. So stuff happens. Weather, traffic, a rude boss, a rude client, missed targets. There are certain things, experiences that happen all day long. We're bombarded all day long with experiences. So someone could poke you, prod you. The kids might just be teasing you. That's an experience. All these experiences are happening to us. So we have no control over that. What we do have control over, and some people don't like this, and this is where this fits into the EI model so beautifully, emotional expression and control, but also emotional resilience and personal power. This is why I like E plus R equals O. I say it's a life model because it's in play from the moment we wake up in the morning and there until we go to bed at night. So it's a life model. It's in your face all day long. So E is the experience, the events. The R is your response, how you respond, how you choose to respond to those events that have happened. Now, this is what's interesting about this model, Jo. So a lot of people don't like the idea that they are 100% in control of their responses. And some people would say, yeah, but I can't help it. You just make me, Jo makes me angry. The way he responds, it really winds me up, and it's not my fault. It's Jo's fault. Jo makes me respond that way. Well, no one makes you respond a certain way. So there are certain situations where we knee jerk. So from our conditioning, we do end up knee jerking to certain things. There are certain triggers. So understanding, going back to the start of this conversation, understanding those triggers, and Marshall Goldsmith wrote a beautiful book called Triggers, actually. Understanding those triggers is critical in this equation. So the experience happens, we then respond, which equals an outcome.
Yeah.
So E plus R equals O. And it sounds really easy, that equation, and easy to manage and navigate and put into place. So here's what peak performers do. Someone that is, if I think about some of the guys I know that were high end, they're Olympic athletes, the way they use, and you see it nowadays when they're being interviewed. Someone might say, well, how do you feel about Joe? He's competing against you in the 100 meters. And sort of like, well, I'm not focused on Joe. I'm focused on me and what I'm doing to get my results. So I'm not worried about that. So they get really good at focusing on taking full responsibility for themselves and then proceed. So they don't blame the events. They don't blame the experiences. They take full responsibility. What they do, which is different to us mere mortals, is they jump to the desired outcome.
Yeah.
So before they respond, so the event happens. So let's just say someone does a really good time and they've got to try and beat this other time, or a high jumper needs to jump a certain height. They don't worry about that. That's the experience. They can't do anything about that. What they then do is, before they respond, they think about the desired outcome that they want. And then they respond appropriately to get that desired outcome. And most of us don't think about that.
Which is a good point for this scale. Is
Yes.
What is the outcome you want to achieve? And if I start getting upset, angry, or upset, and blaming everybody or whatever, then that's not going to achieve that. But then the question is, how do I manage that? Because do you just say, oh well, I shouldn't feel that way? Because feelings are there.
Of course. No.
Yeah.
It's
what would the athlete, Olympic athlete, ready to dive off the board or whatever they're going to do, who's not in the right emotional space to achieve the outcome they want, what would they do?
Yeah, so they then say, okay, it's all the things that we've also previously spoken about, which is, get yourself centered, so think about your posture. So there are certain keys that we spoke about previously. So breathing is one of the big ones.
And things that they've obviously rehearsed hundreds of times before to get them in that space that's going to optimize their performance emotionally.
100%. So breathing is critical. Smiling, so instead of being down, they smile. Their posture, how they hold themselves, like not like Eeyore, but actually a bit more like Tigger. And movement, they get themselves in a good state. So
don't you see, when you watch them preparing for the high jump and all these things in the Olympics and other athletic games, and you see they have certain rituals that they go through. Everyone remembers the Johnny Wilkinson stance and everything. But that was a physical trigger for an emotional state that got them in the flow to perform at their best, or perform exactly how they've done 1,000 times. Like you and I, Jim, in the golf driving range, you might do some great shots until we're actually on the real tee. And it goes the other way. But it's something about rehearsal and repetition, and you can do this with emotional expression, can't you? Manage your emotional expression by maybe rehearsing a trigger. Say, oh, I can feel that anger coming on, or that offload, or whatever's going to happen, and say, once I just open my hands or relax my chin, it just calms down my emotions. Or even just say a certain mantra, whatever it works for that person.
So there's a physical aspect to this, which is the physiology, and they're the four keys. The four keys to the physiology, changing your physiology, is your smiling, breathing, posture, and movement. So they quickly change your physical state, and that helps. More oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine gets delivered in that way. Those happy drugs, if you like. But the more long-term, as you just spoke about, the more long-term aspect of this, in terms of emotional expression and control, is your thinking. So what are you thinking? So are you thinking, have you got the devil on your shoulder, or have you got an angel on your shoulder that's supporting you or actually hindering you? So what are some of the positive, as you say, positive affirmations that you're going to say to yourself? And noticing if you're spiraling into a space of negative affirmations. And it's funny when you ask that question to a group of people, do you use affirmations?
mm,
Not
mm,
many people put their hands up, but actually
mm,
we all use affirmations every
mm,
day.
mm,
We're just not aware of it. So our
mm.
internal dialogue is our affirmation. So let's start be paying attention to what are the positive affirmations I'm saying to myself in
Yeah,
this situation, or am I using a negative affirmation that's actually helping me stay spiraled and stuck?
which is more often the case, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We quite might recognise, we sort of think, oh, what an idiot! Why did they do that? How stupid of me! And even sometimes you'll hear people, as soon as they've done it, say it. Oh, what an idiot! Why did they do that? And actually, they may not have recognised that or may not even use positive affirmations.
No.
Um, and I suspect some of this is down to your own upbringing of what kind of behaviours and emotional responses we all learn
Mm-hmm.
throughout our childhood.
Yeah.
You mentioned childhood. Because how did your parents react when things go wrong? Did they fly off the handle, or were
Mm-hmm.
they sort of calm and reasoned about it? Or when you were a naughty child, how were you dealt with? When was it emotional and overreactive, or calm and measured? So I think a lot of these aspects of emotional response are learnt responses.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
yeah,
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 yeah, completely. If I think back to my childhood, 100%, it
mm,
was, I look back at that and see how my father would have had a hissy fit,
mm,
how my
mm,
mum might have
mm,
responded in those
mm,
situations. Yeah,
mm, mm,
completely. It's
yeah,
very much learned, and also your schooling, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
the relationships that you have, etc., and then the professional relationships that you have with
yes,
bosses that you've worked with,
yeah,
etc.
yeah,
So sometimes I think there are I've always joked about this
mm,
when
mm,
I'm talking about leadership. Either be a phenomenal example of what great looks like,
mm, mm.
or be a dreadful example, because you learn from both, don't you?
Oh, okay.
I mean, so
Mm,
if you've had, and you will have probably worked with some people that are dreadful leaders,
mm, mm,
that don't handle their emotional expression and control particularly well. That's just
mm,
one aspect of them, but
mm,
it's you can straight away in the top of your head you can think,
mm,
yeah, I worked with that individual and they were terrible at this stuff.
mm,
So you can get a sense of,
mm.
well, I definitely don't want to be like that.
Yes.
And then equally, we will have worked with people that are really good at handling their emotional expression and control,
Mm, mm,
and they are what good looks like.
mm,
So
mm,
ideally, what we want is we want to be in that space where we're a great example
mm,
of what good
mm,
looks like. Going
mm,
back to the fingerprint metaphor, what fingerprint are you going to leave in every
mm,
interaction?
mm, mm,
And
mm,
as you said earlier as well, Joe, eyes are on you as the leader.
mm, mm,
People
mm,
are always looking at your nuances and how you specifically respond. So
mm,
every little interaction, they're sensing, feeling,
mm, mm,
trying to use their intuition about, yeah, how's Joe feeling about this
mm,
particularly
mm,
right now? What's
mm,
his truth?
mm.
And they're watching every little aspect of you.
Particularly if you're the kind of leader, and I'll stretch this to say parent figure,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where we learn how to respond to leaders or people who can control and influence us to a large extent, are largely through our upbringing. Are we on edge with them?
Yes.
Do they make us feel slightly uneasy? And often this is a way of controlling other people, and it's a very successful way. So there's no reason very often for these individuals to stop doing that, because that's how they've learned to get what they want, which is what a leader is trying to do very often. But it doesn't at the same time get people's loyalty. It doesn't get their motivation, it doesn't get their commitment, which is actually more important, because you're not going to get sustainable team performance if you are keeping people on edge all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm,
I mean, it's a weird thing to be commenting on, but I
mm, mm,
just recently rewatched Gangs of New York with
mm,
Daniel
mm,
Day-Lewis and Leonardo DiCaprio.
mm, mm, mm,
And Lewis, who is he runs the streets back in New York in the late 1800s. He ruled by fear.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. Mm,
he
mm,
ruled, and that's how he stayed on top. And
mm,
it was
mm,
driven by fear. And of
mm,
course, as you've just said, you didn't use the fear word necessarily, but some leaders use that specifically to control people. And if you think about, without getting too woo-woo and too political, that's how governments run the world, run countries via fear. But I don't want to open a big can of worms around politics.
No, but I think one of the things here is recognizing the different emotional states, because it isn't like some people are more emotional, other people are less emotional, end of. It depends on the emotion. So fear might be one emotion that, like boys, for example, are less acceptable. So you shouldn't be afraid. You should be a tough guy. Don't be strong, if you like. Be tough is the message you might have been brought up with. So what happens then when you feel afraid? Well, you can't show that fear, that emotion, because unconsciously you don't accept it. So you project it as something else. And often it will come out as anger, aggressiveness. But really, a lot of these emotions that we have been taught really not to show or not acceptable manifest inappropriately in other ways.
It's just this particular scale. I must admit, when I'm thinking about relationships, this is one of my favorites for sure. Because of course you get it. You can understand it very easily intellectually. So under control is they're an emotional wreck. They're a train crash waiting to happen. They're on edge, and you can sense it. Your spidey senses are alert to it, and they're having hissy fits and throwing little mini hand grenades here and there, everywhere, all over the place. Under controlled, you can see that also. You can see people that are sort of bottled. You can almost see them. You're getting the levels raising. They're gonna pop soon. They're getting more wound up, and then all of a sudden, bang! They have a hissy fit. And what I love that we haven't really spoken about specifically, which is the middle scale, which is where you want to be, is free and in charge.
Yes.
So it's almost like tranquil fam, it's sort of like just nice and easy, steady state. It's almost like the Matrix. These curveballs are getting thrown and you're just swerving it, and
everything's in slow motion.
It is. But actually free and in charge is exactly that, isn't it? It's almost like it is in slow motion, because you're being more considered, more thoughtful, more conscious, using all the other aspects of emotional intelligence, your emotional intelligence, to be able to handle that situation.
Yes. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's a difference in what's going on inside and what is being expressed explicitly. And I'm thinking about different cultures here. So, the British temperament is probably typically more over controlled. The Italian temperament, Mediterranean, is probably more under controlled. But does that mean, say, people from the Mediterranean are far more angry or upset or volatile? Not necessarily. I wonder, is it just normalized? It's more okay to raise your voice, or speak with a stronger emotion.
I love that.
You're feeling the same.
That's a beautiful example. Those two examples are great examples. Like the hot-blooded Italian, but that doesn't mean that they
If you did the same behavior in our country, let's say England, for example, the traditional view of England, at least, not sure it still is, stiff upper lip and all that, it would be saying, what's wrong with that person? It's like, when really there might be nothing wrong at all. It's just that there's more expressive. So I think the distinguish between, what's internal and what's external, and understanding the cultural differences and background differences and what's acceptable. And I think a very important example there is the difference between gender. What if it's okay for girls maybe to be more assertive, would maybe be considered aggressive, while males of the same behavior would not be considered aggressive. So it's our own stereotypes and expectations of what's going on. And at the end of the day, we don't really know, because somebody's shouting or getting very excited or nervous and upset. That's an indicator of what's really going on for them. But maybe it's not as strong as what you're observing. Maybe it's even stronger than you're observing. You have to check it out with them.
Yeah.
We don't have a sort of physiological measure of the level of arousal in their body. So sometimes there's an element of saying, discussing things with them, and actually there's nothing wrong with bursting into tears if that's going to help you, or
Yeah.
actually shouting and ranting and raving in an appropriate place if that's what you want to do.
Mm.
As long as it's I remember my colleague Tim Sparrow, he's a psychotherapist, and he would say, when he got angry, he'd go and start smashing things as a young man. But he noticed it was always the cheaper things that he broke. The antique chair was never kicked, or anything too valuable china. So there's an element of control. It was more like a just demonstration of letting off steam, but it was a controlled way of doing it. It was almost an okay level of emotional under control. So we have to be quite sensitive about this. Because yes, I like the Matrix example being cool and suave, but actually not in every environment. Some
No.
people, it's quite fun to be childlike, spontaneous, choosing. It's almost like the adult part of you is choosing when to let it out.
Yeah.
That's the difference, isn't
Yeah,
it?
no, I think you're right. I think
Yeah,
sometimes it's important for individuals, if you're a leader, for your team to be aware of the different emotional expressions that you have. And it's not a bad thing to demonstrate that you're disappointed. So how, but that's being conscious and free and in charge.
yes,
So if
yes,
you're deliberately using that I'm disappointed aspect,
yeah,
which might come across as aggressive or not typically you,
mm,
they need to understand what it looks like when you're upset,
yes,
instead of you
exactly,
bottling it up and
yeah,
hiding it and
yeah.
disguising it.
So that's just Jim's way, and
Yeah.
actually he's okay with that. Don't worry about it. Jim likes to sort of let off steam, shout, but he's not angry with you or anybody else. In fact, so it may be more once we understand each other, and maybe it's important for a leader to be authentic. Say, look, when I get angry or upset, I do it this way, and blah blah, and we talk afterwards, and people kind of get used to it. So there are ways around it. I remember when I ran a course in Miami once for an airline industry. These were, never mind the kind of industry which is quite expressive, and it was Miami where there were lots of Latinos and they were really letting off steam, and it was the most fun. I don't know what they thought of me though, being quite reserved Englishman in that environment, but it was quite a contrast. But as I say, emotions are catching, and I became a bit more like that during that week and let my hair
Yeah.
down. It's nice to do so, but we can adapt our emotional expression to different environments, and that's a part of being human.
Yeah.
Flexibility, reading the environment, reading other people, and changing if that's going to work, if that's what you want to do. But going back to that point about your point about the outcome you want to achieve and the response it's also about the choice and choicefulness in doing that. So
Yes.
in TA term, transactional analysis, yes, a child is spontaneous and reactive and fun, and while the parent is more controlled. But the difference between which one you let show and how you manage them is your aware piece, your realistic adult, which is in charge. And that's really what this scale comes back down to. This middle part is, do you have choice and control over how and when you do it?
Yeah.
As Aristotle said, being angry is easy. Knowing when to be angry, how to be angry, with whom you're going to be angry, and so forth. This is the bit we're focusing on with emotional
Yeah.
expression, is a choice. Not saying one's right or another's right, or certain emotions should be expressed more or not. That's up to you, as long as you're choosing to do it. But also
Yeah.
notice when you find it difficult. Maybe you find it difficult to express closeness or love or care, or maybe you find it more difficult to express fear or anxiety, or notice which emotions. And we have the feelings wheel and
Yeah.
different emotional states. Recognize which bits of it you do well and which bits you do less well. Maybe a better way of looking at this as a scale.
Yeah, and this scale reminds me also of people that I've come across personally and also professionally, where they are actually so wound up, so highly strung.
Mm,
And this is where this scale really does show up for them.
mm, mm,
They're so sensitive that the tiniest thing they respond to, they
mm,
blow
mm,
up.
mm,
and they bite on and,
mm,
argue it to death. And
mm,
you're almost thinking, wow, where did that come from? It's sort of like, I wasn't, so that's also, the awareness piece for them is really
mm,
strong. So understanding, for those individuals, they need to really fully understand what are those triggers.
mm,
And it's a bit like a piece of string, pulling on that
mm,
piece of string to
mm,
sort of say, well,
mm,
where's that come from? And
mm,
and as I said earlier, and we've spoken about at length previously as well, is that so much of this is linked to our childhood, our upbringing, our
mm, mm,
conditioning, in
mm,
terms of how we've knee jerked to respond to these situations in life, these curveballs, these things, that
mm,
these events that are
mm,
happening.
mm. And maybe sometimes, well, obviously we are sometimes the trigger in terms of emotional intelligence. It's about interpersonal, just about us. This
Mm-hmm.
scale is also about reading other people's emotions and
Yeah.
awareness of others. And why is that person's getting really upset with me? And now it's quite likely if they're a family member, there's all sorts of historical buttons that are being pressed, for example, and recognizing where are they coming from, what's going on for them, and what can I do differently that's going to help that, and how am I responding and feeling as a response to their behavior, because often this can escalate very easily. It's a sort of emotional reaction to what they're doing. Right, I'm going to up it one. And actually, in terms of coaching or facilitating emotional relationships, it's about learning to de-escalate
Yes.
emotions.
Yeah. It's
And the
interesting.
skill is being able to do that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You've made me start thinking about when I've been facilitating, coaching, working with a team
Mm,
specifically, once they've all gone through the experience of having had their EI profiles fed back to them,
mm,
what I tend to do is I then unpack it collectively as a
mm,
team.
mm, mm,
And I've not got to that depth of
mm, mm,
having a really deep conversation about each of the scales, and specifically allowing each of the leaders and the people in that team to articulate, yeah, here's a, specifically thinking about emotional expression and control in this, the conversation we're having today,
mm,
but actually unpacking them all to that depth of, that level.
mm,
It's always done superficially, and that's partly because the team aren't used to the
mm.
profile, might not be comfortable to be able to have that conversation, might
Yeah,
not
yeah.
trust that conversation, so it takes time to get there. But I sort of almost got I got really excited about that as an
Mm,
option,
mm,
for a
mm,
future team where I might be
mm.
working with them and actually unpacking this properly, because that's always been my intention. But
It's a I say tricky. You need to be cautious, obviously, in such a process.
yeah,
And you are peeling off these layers. And we certainly did it when we ran you have been on the Human Element
yeah,
program, haven't you,
yeah.
Jim? Where
Mm-hmm.
it's more like an encounter group over several days.
Yeah.
But you'd start with looking at behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
how I am, how inclusive am I? But it's also about relationships, how much do I include you, and how much do you want me to include you, Jim? Do you want me to phone
Mm-hmm.
you every day, or just occasionally? So it's nice and straightforward kind of things. But then you'd get to the feelings level, and how do I feel about you, Jim? And how do you feel about me? And this is this is a bit more intense.
Yeah.
And challenging. But this is what Will Schutz described as the area that is often avoided, and it's also the area that creates most of the defenses and the intransigence of team development.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
understanding how we feel about each other.
And
And they had a great model and a process for working through that.
yeah, I think the challenge for, as you know as well as I do, is for most organizations, is the time. Time is the
Yeah,
biggest
yeah,
challenge
yeah.
to allow this to
Mm,
happen.
mm,
So, so many leaders don't believe they need to invest that level of commitment to time,
mm.
that time commitment to unpacking this stuff, but actually, wow.
It's what we said at the beginning, Jim, isn't it? About slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, those 5 minutes each day, and you're being paid to make the big decisions. It's instead of hurry up, slow down. You'll get
Yeah.
more done. I didn't have time to write a short report, so I just waffled. what could you do that's going to make the biggest difference is probably not hurrying around, scurrying around, unless you're a task person. It's just about lots of tasks. But actually the future and what direction you go and setting the groundwork. It's the same with teamwork. If you keep coming across problems and they keep damaging and people keep undermining the progress of where you're trying to go as a business or as a team, then chances are it's not going to go away. It's going to get worse.
Yeah.
And unless you are prepared to take those few days out to really clean the slate, work through, it's like a dirty engine. It'll keep going, but it won't work very well. If you could actually be prepared to take it out, clean every component, re-oil it, put it back together, it will work beautifully for a good long while, as long as you keep maintaining it and looking after it.
Yeah.
The same with a team. You just need to clean it out, work through some of those issues, and then maintain it. And that's what we've done in the past with some of the teamwork groups we facilitate. But, there isn't a shortcut to that.
No,
It
it's
will
long
pay
term.
off massively if you get it right.
Yeah, no, you're right. And my recommendation is that they need to get together for at least 2 days each quarter just to do this development work, And not many organizations invest that level at the very highest levels within their organizations.
And sooner or later, it leads to some kind of catastrophe if you just neglect it and avoid issues. I mean, I don't want to get, again, political, but you look at the post office scandal and some of the other things that have been going on. These are just culmination of decades of not addressing communication issues, which are human feeling relationship issues.
Mm-hmm.
If they created a more open environment and address things openly and had that kind of climate, and people could feel safe, psychologically safe, to share what they feel, not in a defensive way because you'd have worked that out, but in a way that's going to help you, me, this organization, then these kind of things tend not to happen later on. But we only recognize them ultimately when things go catastrophically wrong.
Yes.
And even then, it's going to take years and years to clean things out. The car is broken down, the wheels have come off, the engine itself, the team is just going to be replaced. You need a new engine. It's too late to start cleaning it out then.
So and then the framework is rusted away as well,
so everything's
a whole thing's
gone
kaput.
and it's affected all sorts of other components. The suppliers of the industry are being impacted and so on. So if you can sort this out soon, and it does take a bit of time, but it's time you can't afford to ignore and invest in.
As I said, I really do enjoy the emotional expression and control aspect of relationship management, and I think we've pretty much covered off a good chunk and gone deep with this. So I'm again grateful for us to be able to spend this time together. I guess if I draw a line under this, and we will get together again and talk about the next aspects, which is the conflict handling, which we didn't really get into in any great shape on this episode. But
this is a great prelude to that, because clearly you can see how if you've got under controlled emotions, how they're going to come out in aggressive behavior, for example.
Completely. So Joe, I'm gonna draw a line, say farewell to our listeners, and look forward to catching up with you in a week or so's time for the next episode, which will cover off the conflict handling aspects of emotional intelligence. Thank you once again, buddy, and look forward to catching up with you again very soon. Indeed.
Thanks, Jim.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. You can follow me on Instagram at the EI Guru, and you can get more information from my website, theeiguru.com. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.